Hypershade. All right. Welcome back to another episode of Tutorial Tuesday. And today we'll be talking about Hypershade. There's a couple of questions a lot of guys have asked because of some videos which we've made. I think one is relative to the lava which we did last time. So you can go over and check out the lava which we did last week. And yeah, so we're going to talk about the basics of Hypershade just because a lot of people couldn't follow up. They didn't understand what we're talking about, how textures work, how materials work, and all of those things. So I'm going to go and break these things really down. And so in case you want to follow along, this video is here for you guys to actually learn. And this is applicable to basically every form of shading that you're going to meet. And once you get the hang of this fundamental, it's going to be very easy for you to shade in typically every other app. All right, so let's get right into it. So by default, this is how your Maya should look like. Okay, and there are various ways you can get into Maya Hypershade. So you can click on this button here to get into Maya Hypershade. You can go over, click on the windows, jump through to rendering because the Hypershade is considered as a rendering object. Or you can, split your screen, your viewport into two, go over to panel. Within this part, you have panel and you can switch to Hypershade. All right. So these are ways you can switch to your Hypershade. I'm going to go ahead and just keep this as one. And then from here, we're going to talk about how and what you can do and what you cannot do. So let's go ahead and, just simply drop a plane, hold down shift, right click and drop a simple plane. And then I'm going to just simply scale this all the way up and take this off. Next thing which I'm going to do is to go ahead and add maybe a torus, something. I'm going to right click and just drop in a simple torus here and also press W on my keyboard so I can be able to move this all the way up. Okay, let me zoom this right in so that we can have a good feel of a good view of this. Okay, so now we have this here. The next thing you would probably want to do is to open up your Hypershade. Okay, now opening up your Hypershade is one thing, understanding how your Hypershade works is another. So if, for example, you're using a different workspace, you can always reset your workspace to how it was when you originally installed Maya. So if you're having issues with your workspace, there is always a way you can fix it. How you can fix it is if you go over to your Windows Explorer and directly here you type something like Maya and you go to the version that you're working with, you can definitely delete the preference file. And once you delete the preference file, you see all of this stuff. Once you delete the preference file and reopen Maya, Maya will go ahead and reconfigure your Maya viewport and all of your settings like how it was from the day you installed it the first time. Okay, enough of that. Into Hypershade. So we're clicking on this tiny thing here and it's launching Hypershade for us. Okay, so we have Hypershade directly here. Let me expand this so that we can talk about this a little bit more. So Hypershade works a little bit easier than you probably thought it wouldn't. Okay, so in every shading directly in Maya, there is something called a shading group. Okay, and there is a material and there is a texture and there is a texture coordinate. All right, so the texture coordinate is what tells the texture where and how the texture should be applied onto a surface. The texture is plugged into the material. Within this material is where you can set things like your specularity. Within the material is where you can set your emission. Within the same material is where you can set your roughness. Within the same material is where you can also set your transmission. Yeah, good. Shading group is the shader that is responsible for making sure that this is applied to a surface. We good? Cool. So this is responsible for making sure that all of this material that you're applying to a surface, right, is applied. So your shading group consists of three main things: your surface shading, volume shading, and finally your displacement. All right, so this is how it works. Very simple. Texture coordinate goes to texture, texture goes to material, material goes to shading group. Beautiful, simple, straightforward. Cool. Good. So now we have this out of the way. I will just go ahead and explain a little bit more. Inside every texture, good. Inside every texture contains RGBA most of the times. RGBA is just like your red, green, blue, and your alpha channel. This channel is known as the color. Basically, you guys know already. So, and this is known as the alpha. All right. So this is known as the color, and this is known as the alpha. Very simple and straightforward. This color information is only and always plugged to a color section in your material. And this simply means that because it contains 3 different values, that it only goes to any place that accepts 3 different values. So within your material, if you have a place that supports only 1 value, you can go ahead and pick either the red, the green, the blue, or the alpha and plug it there, but not the 3 of them. Okay, so now we have clarified that. Let me go ahead and talk about how this works. So directly here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and talk about this UI and then dive back into how this works. So this is where you get to preview your material. All right, so you can preview your materials here. This is where your material properties exist. This is where all your shaders, okay, all of the things that you've installed. So if you've installed V-Ray, you get to find your V-Ray shaders here. If you've installed Arnold, you find your Arnold shaders. If you've installed Redshift, just like me, you get to find all of these things here. Okay, so probably a lot of people I know just have only Arnold. Okay, so we're going to work with Arnold. Here is where everything lies. If you have materials, all your materials, not textures, all your materials exist here. Your textures here, utilities here. We're going to talk about utilities maybe sometime later, but today let's talk about this. So within this part, before you start, we can press the tab key to actually bring in a shader. So one thing you should know is Arnold, V-Ray, Redshift all have different shaders. And these shaders don't work with another engine. So if you have Arnold rendering engine, be sure to know that your Redshift shading definitely wouldn't work actually. If you have the V-Ray, be sure to know that you cannot render with Arnold. You definitely need to render with V-Ray. And if you've been looking at this Lambert, your Lambert is your Uber shader that comes with Maya. So don't bother about that. So I'm going to press the tab key and I'm going to type AI standard, because AI standard is the standard. If I click here, shader, you'll find that exactly here. AI standard surface is the standard surface shader that ships with Arnold. All right, so just like I explained to you guys right now, you would notice that directly here we have a shading group, then we have a material. All right, okay, so we'll get back to this. And also, you might have noticed that here we have surface, we have volume, and we have displacement. And also within the material, you might have noticed we have specular, we have emission, we have roughness, and we also have transmission. Okay, so we'll explain more about this soon. Okay, so now because we have this here, what we can do is we're going to go ahead and assign this to a text, to an object, so that we can visually see what we're working with. So there are multiple ways you can assign this. You can right click, hold, and go and say assign to viewport selection, which simply means you need to make it selected first. So you can assign this way. You can right click, hold, and you can come to existing materials and you can assign, or you can use your middle mouse button, click, drag, and drop. All right, middle mouse, click, drag, and drop. Good. So now we've added that there. Let me position this to the side so that we can see all of these things. Okay, so now we've done that there. And just in case you're working with your Hypershade and you cannot find any of these things, if you go over to window, you're going to be able to bring them all up. Okay, good. So now we have actually assigned this. Let's talk about color. So within your color actually influences the color that this thing has. Okay, so you can go ahead and make different changes to the colors directly here. The weight tells the renderer or tells Maya how much weight you want this to have. So you can choose to turn this all the way 1, so it simply means you're going to get a richer value, or you can turn this all the way to 0 and you're going to have less value. Okay, so you can turn this all the way to 1. The same thing applies for the specularity. If we don't want it to have too much specular, we can turn this down. And you might be asking, can you drive the specular with a different color? Yes, you can drive every single thing that exists here with a texture. Okay, so we're going to talk about that right now. So I have this here. Now the next thing which I would like to show you real quick is you can bring in textures from anywhere in the world, right? So you can bring in textures from your hard drive, you can use the default textures that exist in Maya, you can make your own textures and bring them here. So we're going to use a very simple texture, and I think we should try using a cloth. So if I type cloth here, I can bring in a cloth texture. We can select this and position this here, and we can also use a checker texture, and I can position this here. And we can also bring in a noise texture. I like this one a lot. All right, so we can bring that we can bring this here and we can position this here. And one thing I want you guys to know is all of these textures, just like we explained earlier, they all have coordinates. Okay, so I'm just going to bring this real quick so you guys can see. Remember, I said texture coordinate goes to textures, and textures goes to materials, and material goes to the shading group. Now, this texture coordinate that we're looking at here is responsible for tiling, okay, for tiling all your textures. It is also responsible for repeating, all right, and it's also responsible for adding some sort of noise. Okay, so you can add some sort of noise to your texture, right, by using the texture coordinate. So the texture coordinate tells your texture how to wrap around an object, and your material actually tells the rendering engine that this should be plastic, this should be metal, this should be wood, and so on and so forth. Okay, good. So this is what happens. If I bring this over to this part and say, you know what, I want this texture to drive the look of this object. So instead of having the base color as this, I can choose to pick up the color and plug it here. We don't see it here, but we can see it in the preview. So why don't we see here? We don't see it here because we haven't told Maya's viewport to display it. So how can we tell Maya viewport to display it? We can click on this button, or you can press 6 on your keyboard, and then you'll be able to see it. I just talked about tiling, and so if we go over and select the coordinates here, you can see that from this part we can choose to repeat and tile this as much as we want. So if I come through and say I want this to repeat 8 by 8, you would notice it is repeating 8 by 8. So if we want to offset this value, we can come through and offset the value here. If we want to rotate this UV, and you can see we're beginning to have some sort of interesting looking thing going on here. If you want to actually add a bit of noise to the UV, you can actually throw in a couple of noise here. So I can throw in the noise there, and you can see we're beginning to have noise around here. All right, so really cool and really easy, and this way you can see how much this is influencing this, and then you can see the role this is playing. All right, good. So now that you've understood how this works, you may also be wondering, so how do we drive the other things? And you should also see that now that we're plugging this, we plugged color to the red one, and alpha only goes to the green ones. Okay, so the alpha goes to the green ones, and the RGB, which is the color, goes here. And you might have been wondering, because I said only black and white information goes to these ones, so why is this going there? This is going there because as we have R, G, and B as 3 values, these 3 values go here. Individual values only go to the green, while 3 values go to the reds. And we can change this color to whatever we want. Okay, so we can come through and change this color to something like that. Okay, so we can change this. Actually, I think that should be red, and this should be this other color Okay, I think it looks better now. Okay, so we can change this to whatever thing we want. And if you're also wondering if this can be animated, yes, you can always set keyframes to these things. Okay, so now we have understood how the viewport, the Hypershade works. Another thing you may want to know is how can you collapse this. So if you press a button like this, you can collapse this, and you can do that by pressing 1 on your keyboard, 2 and 3. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you can use that to actually drive that. Okay, other values you have here that are black and white. Let's say you want to drive using this alpha. So let's say we want to drive a specific thing by using the alpha. Remember, when we talked about this stuff, I said that 3 color values, okay, well, we can individual colors directly that we have here. All these are individual color values. So you can choose to pick an alpha that is a cumulative of the black and white information of these 3, or you can choose to pick an individual one and use it. All right, so if I want to use just the red values that exist in my texture, I can choose to use only the red values. If I want to use the green values, I can use only the green values. But if I want to use a cumulative of 1, 2, and 3, then you go ahead and use the alpha. Okay, so a good way to actually show this is directly here. You will notice that we already have a black and you already notice that we have a red value, we have a blue value, and all that stuff. Okay, so I would like to use the alpha, or let's say I would like to use just the red channel. Okay, so depending on what you want to make. So if I come through and say, you know what, for the specularity, let's select this so that we can have a good look at this. For the spec, I like the fact that the specularity is all white, but I would like the specular roughness, which is this, because you can now see that it just has one value, and you can see that value here. I would like this to be a cumulative of the entire thing which I have, right? So if I undo this, you can see initially we're having all of this shine, but if I go ahead and plug this directly on the roughness, okay, another thing you would notice is if I have this selected without plugging anything directly, you can see what we have here, right? You can see how much roughness we have. But if I choose to plug this here, you'll notice that there is a significant difference. Other things you can do is we can choose to say, okay, we want to plug this to just the specular. All right, now this specular would have to control the weight. This is set to 1, and you remember when we turn this down, we're having nothing. If we turn it all the way up, we're having something, right? So I can plug this over to just the specular. Okay, and you can see it's giving us a cumulative value of what all this texture information has. So you can still use this for various things. So you can use this for opacity, you can use this for different things. And in case you're asking, how does this alpha really works? This is how alpha works. Within this part where we have an object like this, if I just go ahead and explain this before we go, you would notice that alphas are basically black and white, right? So alphas are basically black and white. So once it's black is 0, and once it's white is 1. Once it's black, especially when you work with transparency, is invisible, and once you're working with white, it is visible. All right, so once you're beginning to work with things that have gray, what you would notice is that within the gray value goes from 0.9 all the way to 0.01. Okay, so when you're working with gray values, this is how that works. And in case you want to go ahead and render this, what we can do, because we're making use of Arnold, what we can do is, I would like to just simply turn on all of this so that we can have a good view. What we can do is we can come over to the Arnold tab, where you can do that from here, turn on the lights. Okay, so we can put a dome light. So I'm just going to click and drop a dome light there, and then just press the Arnold play. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag this directly here so that you guys can have a good look at it. Okay, so you can use the Arnold play to actually render whatever you're working with. All right, so this is basically how you can work with Hypershade. There is just a couple of things that I would really like you guys to know about this thing, but hopefully I'm going to make another video that would cover that. And in case you want to work with some other things, like let's say utilities and all that, Maya has a vast library of utilities that I would really like you guys to, you know, play with and use. We can actually start off with something that has to do with reverse. So if I just press the tab key and use a reverse, you can see we have a reverse. So with the reverse, you can add reverse input, and you can also notice that we'll have the X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z simply means R, G, and B. All right, so I can plug this here. All right, but if you choose to plug this, you can see it's not going there, but you can plug this individual value to another individual value. So there's a couple of maths you can also use to drive this value. You can see now we'll just reverse this. We're having a reverse version of what we have. Let's put this in a bucket and render this. You can see we're having a reverse value, so you can use this to create very amazing piece. All right, so I would like you guys to try this, and if you want me to do a much more extended version of this tutorial, I will be very glad to do it for you guys. So you guys should tell me what you think about this. Have you used the Maya Hypershade? Do you have issues using Maya Hypershade? What are the problems you've run into, and what would you like to see? Talk to me about this in the comment section below. And if you like this video, you know what to do. Hit the like button and also turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know once we release a new video. And if you're new here and you like what you see and you want to see more of this kind of things, there are a lot of videos on the channel. You should go ahead and check them out. If you want to learn new stuff, you want to find new apps, you want to find new ways of doing things, go to the channel and you're going to find amazing stuff. And don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on notification, all of those fun stuff you guys like to do. And until I see you guys again with a tutorial, review, rants, tips and tricks, things like this, peace.